So it'll be a Martin Van Buren for president, Richard M. Johnson for vice president ticket for the Democratic Party in 1836. Well, this is kind of interesting. The Republican Party, with the old National Republicans that are now the Republicans, their party's in disarray, so a new party nominates some candidates. Anybody want to guess what party it was? No? I think you've probably heard of it. The Whig Party. The Whig Party comes into being, enters the election, and they purposely do not choose one presidential candidate, but several. They pick several candidates. And this was actually a strategy. And these several candidates that they picked represented different parts of the United States. So the Whigs purposely did not choose one presidential candidate, but chose several candidates, each from a different part of the U.S. And there's a strategy behind this. Actually, this strategy was known in history as the favorite son policy. So this Whig strategy in the election of 1836 in nominating several candidates from different parts of the country was known in history as the favorite son policy. Now, what you think? You kids are smart kids, and I really think you'll get this. What in the hell were they thinking? What did you say, Silas? Well, I'll be damned. Their philosophy was if you split the vote up like that from different parts of the country, no one would get the 2/3 majority, so where would it go? And the Whigs felt that they had enough pull in the House, a la Henry Clay back in 1824, that they could get one of their candidates elected because they were outnumbering Martin Van Buren several to one. Great job, Brooke. That a girl. So that was the idea that behind the favorite son policy is the Whigs hoped to divide the number of electoral votes, as was the case in 1824, and if no candidate received the majority of electoral votes, it would be again, according to the 12th Amendment of the Constitution, be sent to the House. And the strategy was that the Whigs felt they had enough pull in the House, they could get one of those several candidates elected president. Well, unfortunately, it failed. Van Buren did receive enough electoral votes to become president of the United States. So it was a good strategy. I don't think it was a bad strategy because they knew they didn't have a chance if they had one candidate, so I don't think it was a poor strategy, but it just didn't work. Okay? So on March 4th, 1837, President Martin Van Buren is inaugurated as President of the United States. And what does he announce during his inauguration that Andrew Jackson would have really liked? What's that? Well, in 1837 is when he was inaugurated. Yeah, March 4th, 1837. And when Martin Van Buren gave his inaugural address, what did he state in that address that Andrew Jackson would have really thought was great? No.
Power of the president?
Well, kind of, but what was Van Buren going to do that Lyndon Johnson did in 1963 and part of 64? What did Lyndon Johnson do after he succeeded John Kennedy to the presidency? Did he finish Kennedy's programs, or did he go off on his own? Finish. And that's basically what Martin Van Buren said. He said he was going to follow in Jackson's footsteps. In other words, he was going to run his presidency as his predecessor ran. So we were going to still see that type of philosophy in politics. So in his inaugural address on March 4th, 1837, President Martin Van Buren announced he would follow in the footsteps of his predecessor, Andrew Jackson. Unfortunately for Van Buren, he was barely in office when the nation plunged into an economic depression. Not the one that you hear of so vocally, but the country did go into an economic depression. Not good for a presidency. And I'm going to tell you what happened from 1837 to 1940 in the new election was an economic depression that killed Martin Van Buren, which will take us to that subtopic of the election of 1840.
Wait,
So I'm not going to tell you much about Martin Van Buren's presidency other than he struggled all the way through it because of what? Economic depression. So he's not going to have a fiddler's chance here in the election of 1840, and we'll see if he decides to run. So the election of 1840. Now here was the problem. You don't have to write this down, just think about it. During his term as president, the Van Buren administration did not think that the government should or could do anything to try to stop this depression. So Van Buren basically chose to sit back and wait for the depression to run its course. Okay, that'd be like saying, well, I got a cold, and I got a virus, and there really isn't anything you can take for a virus. There's nothing I can do about it, so I'm just going to let the virus take its course. The problem was the country didn't have a virus, they had a treatable disease in which if they'd have given them antibiotics, they could have fixed the health problem that the person had. Well, Van Buren misread that. So he just thought the depression would take care of itself, and it didn't, and this cost him any chance at being re-elected in 1840. Now, did they nominate Van Buren for the presidency? They did. The Whig Party nominated a person by the name of William Henry Harrison. William Henry Harrison. And his vice presidential candidate on the Whig Party will be John Tyler. And that name should ring a bell because he eventually becomes what? John Tyler. President. Okay? So the Whig Party nominates William Henry Harrison for the presidency and John Tyler for the vice presidency. And they had kind of a catchy little campaign slogan, which was what, Madison? Tippecanoe and Tyler too. That was their campaign slogan. Now, and Tyler too, I think makes sense, right? What was Tippecanoe? Anybody know?
Indian tribes?
What'd you say?
Some sort of an Indian tribe.
Well, actually, that's pretty close. It's a river in which General Harrison in 1811 fought the Indians on the Tippecanoe River. And he was kind of famous for his big victory over the Indians, one of many Indian battles in that era. And so the Tippecanoe River became kind of his claim to fame. So the slogan made sense now that you know that story. Is the campaign slogan was Tippecanoe and Tyler too. This was campaign slogan came from General Harrison's battle with the Indians on the banks of the Tippecanoe River in 1811. Now, Whigs didn't have much trouble with this. What they campaign on the whole time? Yeah, the depression. God, this guy screwed you up bad. I mean, you got the economic depression you didn't do anything about. So the Whigs just campaigned on how bad Van Buren handled the depression, right? Not hard to campaign on that. And the Whigs won an overwhelming victory in this election. Overwhelming victory. And William Henry Harrison becomes the nation's 9th president. I'll give you a little prelude. We'll talk about the next test material. He doesn't last long, right? Anybody know the story about William Henry Harrison? He gives his inaugural speech, very lengthy speech, in a downpour, and he catches pneumonia and dies shortly afterwards. And John Tyler becomes president like that. Okay, we'll talk about that later. But let's end with the final days of Andrew Jackson. Well, we'll tell you about the inauguration, but let's talk about the final days of Andrew Jackson first. You know how old Andrew Jackson was when he left the presidency? Anybody want to guess? 70. He was 70, which is fairly old for a president to leave office. So he was 70, and he was more than $7,000 in debt. Now, if you wanted to remember that on a test, that'd be easy, wouldn't it? He was 70 and $7,000 in debt.
7,000 or 70?
7,000. 70 and $7,000 in debt. Anybody, why in the world would he be $7,000 in debt?
Why are we talking about Jackson?
Final days of President Jackson.
That's the next subtopic.
Isn't that the next subtopic?
Yeah.
Yes. Why are we going back?
Why are we going back?
That goes to his death. Yeah, okay.
His final days. We're not going backwards. We're telling you what happened to him after he left the presidency.
He was 70 and $7,000 in debt when he died or when he left the presidency?
When he left the presidency.
Okay.
He was 70 years old and more than $7,000 in debt. Why would he be in debt? What would get him in debt? What's the only thing he owned? He owned a plantation, right? Well, his adopted son, Andrew Jackson Jr., messed up the finances of that. He poorly managed his plantation in Tennessee, which left him $7,000 in debt. Was he paying much attention to his plantation when he was president? Not a lot. His adopted son Andrew Jackson Jr. was running the show, didn't do a very good job, left his father $7,000 in debt. Now Jackson was kind of depressed when he left the presidency because he knew that William Henry Harrison's victory, from the Whig Party perspective, would basically stand for everything opposite that he had established while president. Okay, so he's thinking to himself, we're going to heck in a handbasket here. Everything I worked hard to accomplish during my presidency is going to be changed completely the opposite with a victory by the Whig Party. So Jackson was a very disappointed man when he left office. He knew that the Whig Party stood for everything opposite he had established during his presidency, and he lived out the rest of his life not very happy. Finally, on June 8, 1845, Jackson died at his home with family and friends surrounding him. June 8, 1845, Jackson died at his home with family and friends surrounding him. At his immediate side, at the time of his death, was his slave, Hannah. Okay? Immediately at his side, at the time of his death, was his slave Hannah. The reason I mention that is because Hannah was immediately at the side of whose death earlier? His wife's. Matter of fact, his wife actually died in Hannah's arms when she passed away earlier. So he was very close to his slave Hannah. Obviously he didn't treat her much like a slave. She was very loyal to the family, and she was at his immediate side at the time of his death. And also, ironically, Jackson's wife, Rachel, had died in Hannah's arms as well. Well, Jackson was buried next to Rachel at the couple's Tennessee plantation, known as the what? Hermitage. Who said they were there? Somebody here said they were there. Madison, Hermitage. Pretty cool, isn't it? Did you happen to see their grave sites? Do you remember? Yeah, pretty cool. You got something on all of us. That's pretty cool. So President Jackson was buried next to Rachel at the couple's Tennessee plantation known as the Hermitage. Okay, then we will tell you about the inauguration of William Henry Harrison and we'll be done. The inauguration of William Henry Harrison. Is that on your ID?
No.
Well, let's put it on there. Let's get after it. The inauguration of William Henry Harrison.
I saw an inauguration.
Gotta
I-N I-N-A-U-G U-R-A-T-I-O-N. Inauguration. I-N-A-U-G-U-R-A-T-I-O-N.
Any ID things?
You won't need one.
Harrison.
William Henry Harrison. Well, inauguration day for William Henry Harrison, I told you part of the story, was March 4th, 1841. And it was a very cold, windy, brisk day. Bad weather. Listen, for crying out loud. But how many times do I repeat this? Seriously, how many times? It irritates me when you say, what was that? When you know I repeated about 9 times. The more you say that, the less I repeat. Okay, so let's move on. On March 4th, 1841, the weather was very unfavorable on Inauguration Day. It was very cold, windy, and brisk. And guess how old William Henry Harrison was when he was elected president? 68. So he was fairly old to be elected as a president, 68 years old. Even though the weather was so bad, he insisted on delivering his inaugural address. And it lasted an hour and 40 minutes. I think probably in that weather he maybe could have shortened it up, but he didn't. And in the middle of it, it began a drenching rain. So it's really a cold day to start with on March 4th, 1841. It's very windy, brisky, cold weather. And even though William Henry Harrison was 68 years old, he still insisted on giving the speech, which is probably okay, but he probably shouldn't have got an hour and 40 minutes, especially when the drenching rain started to come down toward the middle of his speech. Well, he gives his speech, he arrives at the White House, he's soaking wet, and he came down with a cold. That wasn't so bad, but that cold became progressively worse, and eventually it turns into what? pneumonia. I'll spell that for you. So Harrison arrived at the White House soaking wet. He came down with a cold. It grew progressively worse. And finally he got pneumonia. That is P-N-E-U-M-O-N-I-A. P-N-E-U-M-O-N-I-A. Well, as a result of that pneumonia, on April 4th, ironically, 1841, 1 month after his inauguration, what happens? He dies. So, as a result of his pneumonia, on April 4th, 1841, President Harrison dies of pneumonia after only a month in office. Who becomes president? John Tyler. And he becomes the first vice president in American history to succeed to the presidency. Becomes the first man in American history, or first vice president in American history to succeed to the presidency. Who was his vice president when he served out the remainder of Harrison's term? Anybody know? Good guess.
Henry Clay.
Huh? What'd you say?
Henry Clay.
No?
Van Buren.
No? No?
Have we talked about him?
Nobody.
No?
William Crawford.
No?
Is it nobody?
Nobody! Thank you. We went without a vice president for the first time in recent American history at this point, after the death of William Henry Harrison, because there was no vice president during Tyler's presidential term. Now, there are two important things. We're going to cover the administration of John Tyler right now in the next 5 minutes, and then we're going to move on to our next test topic, which I'll tell you about in a minute. Two very important issues occurred during the administration of John Tyler. One negative, one positive. Anybody want to guess what one of them might have been, Carly? Keeping that in mind. What happened to the boundaries of the United States? They extended all the way to the Pacific Ocean during Tyler's presidency. The boundaries of the United States, and we'll explain that to you later, extended all the way to the Pacific Ocean. Does that mean every state we know today came into the Union during his administration? All it would take would be one, and we would extend to the Pacific Ocean. You'll figure that out later. That was a positive thing. The boundaries of the nation were established and extended to the Pacific Ocean. The bad thing was, during his administration, differences of opinion between citizens of the North and citizens of the South became increasingly serious. So, differences of opinion between the citizens of the North and citizens of the South became increasingly serious. What would these differences eventually lead us into? Civil War. It's a ways off yet. It's going to be, 20 years off yet, approximately. But this is where the start of differences between North and South began. Was during John Tyler's term. Okay, now here's kind of our plan. We are going to have a review tomorrow. Now I want to get some input from you here.